October 3, 1987. The banks of the Lomba River, southern Angola. Through the Mopane scrub, engines growling in low gear, 12-wheeled vehicles move in line, 3 axles each, nearly 3 meters tall, a long rifled gun jutting from a low turret, run flat tires the size of a grown man. They look wrong. They look impossible. Every military doctrine on Earth had insisted this vehicle could not exist. The Soviets had tried wheeled armor and rejected it for fighting roles. The Americans said an infantry fighting vehicle needed tracks. The Germans said the same. And yet these machines were rolling straight at a mechanized brigade fielding T-54 and T-55 main battle tanks, Soviet armored personnel carriers, self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, and a full SA-8 missile battery. Over the next 72 hours, they would help destroy an entire FAPLA brigade. 61 Soviet-built armored vehicles would burn. More than 1,000 Cuban and Angolan soldiers would die. It would become the largest mechanized battle fought on African soil since the fall of the Afrika Korps in 1943. The vehicle that did it had been built by a nation living under the most complete arms embargo ever imposed on any country in history. Its designation was the Ratel. It was the first wheeled infantry fighting vehicle the world had ever seen, and every expert had said it could not work. To understand why the Ratel existed, you need to understand what happened to South Africa between 1974 and 1977. For a decade, the country had been slowly strangled. After Sharpeville in 1960, Britain cut off new armor sales to Pretoria. In August 1963, the UN General Assembly passed a voluntary arms embargo. South Africa turned to France, to West Germany, to commercial truck manufacturers, anywhere it could find components and license agreements. Then came the shock. In April 1974, the Portuguese Empire collapsed. Within 18 months, Angola and Mozambique tipped into Marxist-aligned independence. Cuba deployed tens of thousands of troops across South Africa's northern border, armed with the most modern Soviet equipment the Warsaw Pact could supply. SWAPO's insurgency escalated. The buffer states that had shielded Pretoria for decades were gone overnight. Then, on November 4, 1977, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 418. The embargo became mandatory under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. No weapons, no spare parts, no manufacturing licenses. For the first time in the organization's history, an arms embargo carried the full force of international law. South Africa had two choices: fight with obsolete equipment or build its own. The problem the designers faced was straightforward and brutal. The border ran over 1,000 kilometers across sand, scrub, and unmapped bushveld. Tracked infantry fighting vehicles meant tank transporters and fuel convoys the SADF did not have. Kalahari dust chewed through tracks within weeks. The existing armored vehicles, the French-designed Eland and the British-designed Saracen, could not carry enough infantry, could not self-deploy across the theater, and could not survive a modern Soviet anti-tank round. The design brief was written in plain language: build a vehicle that could drive 1,000 kilometers under its own power, carry 8 infantry to the fight from the vehicle itself, survive a landmine, and run on commercial truck parts so the embargo could be worked around. Do all of it without a single imported military component. The work ran through Sandock-Austral, hulls welded in the Durban shipyards, and railed to a site east of Johannesburg at Boksburg for final assembly. South Africa's first purpose-built armored vehicle plant had been a shipyard and a railway siding. The engineers had never built anything like this before. They built it anyway. The vehicle that emerged in 1976 was 7.2 meters long and over 2 meters tall. Combat weight was 18.5 tons. The hull was welded steel, 20 millimeters on the front arc. The underside was shaped into a V that deflected mine blasts away from the crew compartment. The engine was a Büssing D3256 turbocharged inline-6 diesel, producing 282 horsepower. 6 wheels driven through a fully automatic transmission. Top speed 105 kilometers per hour. Operational range 1,000 kilometers on a single tank of fuel. That last figure was not marketing. It was a combat requirement. A vehicle that could drive 1,000 kilometers under its own power did not need tank transporters. It did not need a logistics tail of fuel convoys moving on predictable routes. It could appear anywhere along 1,000 kilometers of frontier and be ready to fight when it arrived. There were 5 main combat variants: the Ratel 20 carrying a 20mm autocannon, and 9 dismounted infantry, the Ratel 60 with a breech-loading mortar, the Ratel 90 mounting the same 90mm rifled gun proven on the eland, the Ratel 12.7 command vehicle, and later, the Ratel ZT-3, fitted with 3 tubes of laser-guided anti-tank missiles capable of killing any tank on Earth at 5 kilometers. The first wheeled infantry fighting vehicle in the world, predated the American LAV-25 by 7 years. It predated the Stryker by more than 2 decades. The unit redesigned its shoulder flash to show a rampant honey badger. The Afrikaans word Ratel means honey badger. The animal is small, low to the ground, almost comical in appearance. It is known across southern Africa for one trait: it refuses to back down from anything. The combat debut came on May 4, 1978, in Operation Reindeer. Combat Group Juliet, under Commandant Frank Bestboyer, struck SW-APO's base at Chetaquera, 23 kilometers inside Angola. The Ratel's held ground that foot infantry and older armored cars could not have taken. Within a year, mechanized formations had been reorganized into 61 Mechanized Battalion Group, the SADF's first dedicated Ratel unit. The lessons came fast. On June 10, 1980, in Operation Septic, Ratels assaulted a fortified bunker complex called Chifofo. SW gunners used captured Soviet 23mm anti-aircraft cannons in direct fire against the vehicles. 3 Ratels were knocked out in minutes. The crews learned a rule that held for the rest of the war: never drive a Ratel head-on into prepared anti-aircraft fire, flank it, fix it, kill it from an angle. In August 1981, Operation Protea delivered the first pitched battle against Soviet tanks at Mongua. Ratel 90 crews under Captain Hannes van der Merwe engaged T-34-85s of the Angolan army. Multiple tanks burned. FAPLA lost around 1,000 dead across the operation. A Soviet warrant officer was captured in the ruins. The embargoed vehicle had just beaten Moscow-supplied armor in a stand-up fight. Then came the tanks the Ratel was not supposed to handle. Operation Askari, January 3, 1984, at Cuvelai. Battle Group Delta, under Commandant Van Grayling, engaged FAPLA's 11th Brigade and a full company of Soviet-built T-54s. Over 3 days, every tank in that company was destroyed. Ratel 90 crews, firing 90mm heat rounds at close range in dense bush, broke through the frontal armor by aiming for turret joints, side plates, and the rear deck. 324 enemy dead. 7 SAF killed, 1 Ratel lost to direct tank fire. The verdict went straight to headquarters. The Ratel 90 could handle Soviet tanks if the crews were trained to fight at close range and use cover. The key was the bush. In open ground against a stabilized gun and a full ammunition load, the Ratel lost. In dense cover at under 200 meters, the flanking shot triggered catastrophic ammunition cook-off inside the Soviet hulls. The Ratel did not beat the T-54 on its terms. It beat it on different terms entirely. By September 1987, FAPLA was advancing with 4 full brigades on the UNITA base at Mavinga, under a plan drawn up by Soviet General Konstantin Shagnovich. The SATF's response was built around 61 mech, 32 battalion, and a handful of pre-production Ratel ZT-3 anti-tank vehicles being fielded for the first time. On September 10, the ZT-3 fired its first combat missile. 3 T-55s of FAPLA's 21st Brigade were advancing through the bush after Ratel 90 rounds had failed to stop them. Major Hannes Nortman brought up the pre-production launchers. Gunner Corporal Darren Nelson, in a Ratel with call sign 12, fired 7 missiles. At least 3 T-55s were destroyed. The vehicle's internal recorder captured Nelson's cry in Afrikaans when the first tank exploded. A pre-production weapon, never before fired in anger, had just proved itself against the most common tank on Earth. 3 weeks later came the main battle. At 10:17 on the morning of October 3rd, 12 Ratline, 90s of Charlie Squadron, under P.J. Cloate, moved online through dense bush against FAPLA's 47th Brigade. The 47th had T-54s and T-55s, Soviet armored personnel carriers, self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, a full rocket battery, and an SA-8 missile system. On paper, the Ratline should have lost. Its 90mm gun was marginal against T-55 frontal armor. Its hull would not stop a tank round. But in the Bushveld, 3 things flipped the fight. The rat line, nearly 3 meters, let commanders see over scrub that hid the low Soviet tanks. The trained two-man turret crew cycled rounds faster than a FAPLA single-gunner tank could traverse. And in thick cover, engagements happened at under 200 meters, inside the 90mm lethal envelope, where flanking shots triggered the ammunition cook-off that killed Soviet crews before they could respond. By the end of the operation, FAPLA's 47th Brigade had ceased to exist as an organized formation. 61 Soviet-built tanks, 83 armored vehicles, 20 multiple rocket launchers, more than 1,000 enemy dead, 3 rat line, 17 Sadolf killed, a complete SA-8 missile system. The first ever to fall into Western hands was recovered intact from the battlefield and passed to NATO intelligence. The experts had said the wheeled vehicle could not beat the tracked tank. The Lomba River had just proved them wrong. The comparison with every contemporary rival reveals what the experts had missed. The Soviet BMP-1 had a low-pressure gun and anti-tank missiles on tracks. The American M13 was cheaper and more numerous. The German Marder had better armor and a modern autocannon. The French AMX-10P was lighter and amphibious. Every one of them ran on tracks because the military consensus was clear. A real infantry fighting vehicle needed tracks. In practice, the Ratel offered something none of those vehicles could match. It could self-deploy 1,000 kilometers across the African bush and arrive ready to fight. It survived landmines that destroyed tracked vehicles outright. Its mechanical simplicity allowed field repair, with commercial truck parts available through civilian supply chains that the arms embargo could not block. Its crew training and optics consistently beat Soviet single-gunner tanks at close range. And in the specific terrain of southern Angola, wheels outperformed tracks every time. The dust that chewed through track links in weeks left rubber tires functional for months. The same terrain that made tracked logistics a nightmare made wheeled self-deployment a decisive advantage. Production ran from 1976 to 1987. Approximately 1,381 vehicles were built. The Ratel was exported to at least 10 nations. Morocco took the first 60 in 1978. Jordan bought 321 in the early 2000s and retrofitted them with American engines. Rwanda, Ghana, Djibouti, Senegal, Cameroon, and the Central African Republic all fielded the vehicle. Captured examples ended up in Polisario hands in the Sahara. The conceptual legacy is larger than most military historians acknowledge. The American LAV-25, fielded in 1983, followed the Ratel by 7 years. The Stryker, fielded in 2002, followed by a quarter century. The French VBCI, the Finnish Patria AMV, the German Boxer, every major Western wheeled fighting vehicle built since the 1980s stands in the Ratel's conceptual shadow. Its intended replacement, the Donnell Badger, was contracted in 2007. As of 2026, not a single Badger has been delivered. Approximately 300 Ratels remain in South African service, refurbished and repainted at roughly 90% serviceability. Moroccan Ratels still patrol the Western Sahara. The vehicle has outlasted its designed replacement by nearly 20 years and counting. October 3, 1987. The banks of the Lomba River. 12-wheeled vehicles painted brown against the dust, rolling toward a Soviet general's war plan. On paper, the Ratel should not have worked. Its welded steel hull would not stop a modern tank round. It had no night vision on the original production run. Its 90mm gun was theoretically marginal against its most common target. It had been built in a converted shipyard by a country the international community had tried to wall off from the world. And yet it worked. It worked at Châteauroux 1978. It worked at Cuvelai against T-54s in 1984. It worked on the Lomba against a Soviet general's war plan in 1987. It works today in 6 foreign armies and in South Africa itself, 38 years after the last one came off the line at Boksburg. The experts said a wheeled vehicle could not do what a tracked vehicle did. They were right about the tracks. They were wrong about the vehicle.